Our first speaker is Stephen Koppel, photographer and founder of the EDI Institute. Stephen Koppel spent 20 years as a senior partner and business consultant with Accenture, leaving in 2002 to volunteer with nonprofit organizations to help maximize their social impact. In 2013, Koppel founded the EDI Institute as a nonprofit dedicated to pioneering a new form of therapeutic expression called Expressive Digital Imagery, or EDI. Please welcome Stephen Koppel to present Expressive Digital Imagery, EDI.
Thank you, Callie. Well, thank you, Callie, for that warm introduction, and it's so wonderful to be here today to help kick off Ideas UMass Boston. I'd like to begin by sharing an image with you. And this is an image that was created by a woman in a workshop on the theme of resilience. And she shared this image with a group of other women and described that this image and all the layers and the textures and the patterns here reflected a major personal transition that she was going through in her life. It happened to be a family-related transition. And she said she was surprised that she was able to share this image with this group because it was a very deeply personal story. So she created this image on an iPhone using a specialized mobile app that she had just learned a few minutes before. My question for all of you today is, when you look at this image, what do you think it might have been when it was a photograph? What do you see in this image? A lot of people look at this and say they see landscape, almost like looking through the window of an airplane with the different layers of the clouds and the sky. But actually, it was something very different. It was her lunch that day. Pretty tasty looking BLT sandwich. And she literally just snapped a picture of her sandwich, and I'll go back and you'll see how she zeroed in on this spot where the two halves of the sandwich met to allow her to create that expressive image. This is what we call expressive digital imagery, or EDI. And what I'd like to do for you today is to bring EDI to life by sharing imagery and the stories behind it, and also the work that we're doing at the nonprofit EDI Institute that I founded just over 2 years ago. And in fact, the background of the EDI Institute is something deeply personal to me. As Callie mentioned, I spent 20 years as a business consultant and then as a volunteer doing consulting work with nonprofits throughout Boston. I could have done it forever. It was hugely gratifying. I loved what I did. And then, as it happens with so many of us, life presents interesting journeys. And for me, two things happened. One was I took up photography, initially just as a hobby. I'd never done anything artistic in my whole life. And then, very unexpectedly, that photography became deeply therapeutic when my family became faced with some difficult medical challenges. I'm happy to say that now we're in a better place, but what happened with me is I was reflecting back on what had helped me cope through some of those hardest times, and I began to realize that my imagery had just been so wonderfully therapeutic. And it gave me this idea of bringing the same power of expressive imagery right on mobile devices to anybody, regardless of whether they had any technical training, felt that they could use a camera, thought that they had any creative abilities. And that's how the EDI Institute was born. And we began by taking it to hospitals and clinics and homeless shelters and community centers throughout Boston. And every place we went, the response was the same. It was tremendous. People said they were able to express meaningful aspects of their lives in ways that they hadn't been able to with words alone. Today, EDI has been integrated across a number of organizations. This is just a sampling. Many of these you'll recognize. McLean Hospital, that's integrated EDI across all levels of care for a variety of psychiatric diagnoses. Dana-Farber with patients and family and staff. The Gosnold Addiction Center on Cape Cod. Aspire, which is children with autism. It's part of the Massachusetts General Hospital. Veterans at the VA Hospital in Brockton. And finally, smaller community organizations like Jeff's Place that provides support for bereaved children and their families. And the common foundation across all these organizations is how EDI has been integrated into their therapeutic programs. EDI is not a therapy in and of itself. It is a technique to take existing evidence-based therapies to a new level of effectiveness. And now what I'd like to do is kind of bring that to life for you by sharing some images and demonstrating for you how it works. The first image began as this photograph, these crumpled phone cords, actually at McLean Hospital. And they were transformed by a woman into this image. And I was there as she shared with a group of her peers with bipolar disorder how this image, better than any other way she'd been able to express, told the story of what she feels in her mind when she has manic cycles of her bipolar disorder. And she talked about the neurons crashing around. And I never forget how she said, "I can't wait to share this image with my son. He knows about my bipolar disorder, but I don't think he really understands what it is that I feel." And part of the power in the room that day was the connection that this formed with the other individuals who were able to look at that image up on the screen and say, "Yes, that's how I feel too." When the group was over, the clinician sat down with me and she said, "Steve, I don't know if you realize this, but our groups just never run like this. In traditional talk therapy groups, it's so hard to get people to express themselves. And the foundation for treatment of behavioral health challenges is getting people to open and express themselves. And without that, we can't treat them effectively." And that's why she said that the engagement and the connection that happened in the room that day was so important. Here's an image created by a young woman with substance use disorder. And she literally just took her sandals off, put them on the floor, and snapped this picture with an iPad, and she turned it into this image. This is a deep statement of the resilience that she was expressing and her statement of a commitment to recovery. And she worked with her clinician on this image on one of the most foundational aspects of behavioral health treatment, post-treatment recovery. The risk of relapse is so great today with so many of these challenges that people face, and this image enabled her to work with her clinician to create a strategy, and this is a personal image that she keeps with her as an active reminder of her commitment and part of her strategies to stay healthy. And finally, a very different story, and this was a tragic story of a young boy who had recently lost his father in a terrible accident. And he took this image that he borrowed from a copyright-free website, and he transformed it into this, a statement of the extreme grief that he was feeling. His clinician commented that one of the hardest things with these young children who have lost family members is to be able to get them to express what it is that they're experiencing and how fundamentally important that is for their successful treatment. And this image allowed him to open up and talk about what he was experiencing and then to be treated in a very powerful way. I mentioned Aspire and the children that we have worked with autism spectrum disorder. This summer, clinicians at the Massachusetts General Hospital's Aspire program came up with a very innovative use of EDI. And what they did was they gave each of these kids the same starting photograph and then gave them the opportunity to express the answer to a simple question, "How are you feeling today?" by transforming that photograph into each person's own image. And I'll show you what they came up with now in this short video. What I always find so remarkable when I watch that video is how the images so closely match the words. And after all, these kids with autism, that's one of their biggest challenges, being able to express themselves verbally in all kinds of circumstances. This kind of technique allowed the clinicians to now get these kids to do what's most important for their ongoing health and treatment. I mentioned before that the key of EDI is how it becomes integrated into existing therapeutic programs. And I thought I'd share just two examples of how that is being done. The first is a notion that we're very excited about and we've actually begun clinical research on, which is the idea of an image-based recovery plan. So this is an individual, Jeff, and coming out of his treatment, he worked with his clinicians to create 4 images that to him represent his most important strategies for staying healthy post-treatment. The first one talks about what he learned with mindfulness techniques and living in the moment each day. The second one he titled Nourishing My Mind. That started as a photograph of the books on his own bookshelf that he super saturated as a reminder that when he's depressed, if he simply picks up one of those books and reads, that will help him stay healthy. He's taking his medication and finally keeping a positive outlook. So consider for a moment somebody leaving treatment and going home with a set of images like this that are deeply personal, that people take pride in these images. There's been a large level of engagement in this, and now this can exist in any kind of format. This could hang on the refrigerator, it could be digitally on your iPhone, cards in your pocket, and we've been using all of those. And the key is the level of engagement and ownership that the person feels over that. If you kind of compare that with today's standard of care, which is written text-based discharge notes, I think you can get a sense for the opportunity we have. And we're not talking about replacing the doctor's orders or getting rid of something like this, but to supplement this with an image-based recovery plan, we believe has a major opportunity to improve long-term health outcomes. Similarly, many of you may be familiar with the concept of a thought diary. And this is used frequently with treatment of mental illness. You may have heard of cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT, which is one of only a few evidence-based techniques for treatment of mental illness. And the idea behind CBT is to identify situations, which is the first column, and then the patient will then write down the thoughts and feelings that those situations cause, and then alternative thoughts and feelings with the help of a clinician, often to correct unhealthy thought patterns. So this is a very common technique. It's proven. It's very, very successful across a wide range of challenges. Our notion is to replace this, or to supplement it at least, with an image-based thought diary. And very quickly, the first image talks about a breakup in one's life. The second 2 images, the thoughts and feelings, talk about a sense of being unloved and being alone. And then the new thoughts and feelings talking about a level of support and care that that person now realizes exists. So again, our notion here is to take an existing evidence-based therapy and to enhance this through imagery that is much more meaningful, engaging, and supportive to the individuals who are involved. In the last few minutes that I have here, I thought I would bring this to life for you by showing how it works. And we have created an app that is specifically designed for this kind of therapeutic self-expression. We believe it's the only mobile app of its kind that's been developed. It was actually created after observation with over 1,000 individuals going through this process. So what I'm going to simply do here is plug in my iPad, and I'm going to just give you a brief demonstration of how this works. And what I've done is I've preloaded an image of a pathway through the woods. And let's say I want to tell the story of a journey that I'm on in my life. The way this works is that EDI is grounded in these 4 steps that you see across the top of the image. And this is very intentional. We give people a sense of structure to the process. Compose your image, tune it, style it, and finish it. So I'll start with compose, and I'll pick crop, and I'm simply going to drag the blue dots, and I'm going to frame this image. I don't quite know the story yet that I want to tell, but I know that I want to focus much more on this pathway, and now I'll press the green check mark, and that's now my new image. Now I'm going to do this very quickly. You can sense there's a lot more to this, but I want to give you a sense for how it works. Now I'll go into tune, and I have a new set of options. Again, I don't yet know the story I want to tell, but I know I want to make it a positive story. So I'm going to pick vibrance, and then simply with my finger swiping anywhere on the screen, I can adjust the level of vibrance. So I'm going to make this a very positive story, add the vibrance, and now I'll do the green check mark. Now I'll go into style. This is where it gets very powerful. And there's actually 3 categories of style: realistic, impressionist, and abstract, and you see those on the left. So I might start by experimenting, and I'll pick highlights, and I'll swipe my finger, and you can see the kind of effect that I get there, but that's not yet going to be part of my story, so I'll X out of that. I'll go into edges underneath impressionist. You can see the kind of dramatic change that this would make to the image. And then finally, if I go into the abstract, I could do something like gravel. You can see this, or I could do scratches. And this is what somebody might do. They would experiment initially. Now I'm ready to start telling my story. And I'm first looking at this pathway, and I notice these shadow and gravel areas. And what occurs to me is that maybe I can use that to help express challenges that I still have along my journey. So I'm going to go back into edges. We learned very early on that the key to EDI is the ability to apply effects locally. So instead of using the paint can, which you see on the top left, which is how I've done all the things so far, if I pick the brush, I can now brush the edges into specific parts on the image. And as I do this, I like the way that this is going to help me express these challenges that I still have in my life, on my journey. So I'll press the green check mark again. And now as I'm looking at it, I'm considering the fence. And I'm thinking that fence looks like it provides a lot of guidance and a sense of protection, but you know, that path forward isn't always so clear to me in life. So I'm going to pick the blur option, and now the brush, and I can now literally just brush the blur right on the fence to indicate this and to express this uncertainty and lack of clarity in my life. And now I'll accept that change, and let's say as the last step, I want to show that I'm headed to a more positive place in my life. I remember back in Tune, I had an option for brightness. I can pick the brush again, and I can simply brush in the brightness kind of emanating out from the end of this pathway. And I'm obviously doing this very quickly, but I think you'll get a sense. When I'm all done, we learned very early that the idea of entering a quick caption to capture the essence of the image is so important. I go to Finish. I can press on caption, and it could be as simple as my journey, and that would be my image. If I take my finger and put it on the image at any place, I see the starting photograph. We do this because it gives people a sense of extreme satisfaction and pride in the image that they've created. So again, that's just a very quick demonstration of how this works. I will tell you that we see unlimited possibilities for EDI in the future. Literally across any chronic illness, whether it's cancer or MS or diabetes, or as you've seen, any kind of mental illness or addiction. For children who have trauma experiences, for veterans with PTSD or traumatic brain injury, for people with end-of-life hospice care, all now able to express themselves in such powerfully new ways and ultimately improve health outcomes. And our focus at the EDI Institute is to innovate this idea, to perform scientific research to demonstrate the outcomes that we see and feel every day, and that's now underway, and then ultimately to integrate EDI into therapeutic programs everywhere. And that's what has me extremely passionate about this and very excited about the times ahead. Thank you very much.
So what we know from Steve's talk is that images, a simple image, can articulate a layered and nuanced, very powerful set of emotions, and that can lead people to a path of healing, and that, from what you've said, that EDI doesn't stand alone. What we know about medicine now and the future of it is that it has to be integrated into many disciplines. So this seems to fit right into where we're going in terms of treating people and healing people, if you want to use a broader term. Here's my question for you is, you know, we've known a long time that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So this is, you know, an amped up version of that, if you will. You start to present this to folks. What made you think, where was your aha moment that this could actually lead to people really feeling committed to expressing themselves through this imagery? I mean, what was that kickoff?
You know, Callie, for me, it was actually the very first time we did this at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, where I'm honored to serve on the board. And we sat in a room with patients and family and staff, and they literally took pictures of the carpet on the floor and the lights in the ceiling. And their comments coming out of the room was, Steve, this is something we've just never felt before, and being able to express what we're dealing with cancer. And it was literally the very first time that I took this to an organization, and then it just built on itself as we went to each new place. So you're right, it is kind of a simple idea. We all talk about a picture's worth 1,000 words, but to actually see it and talk to people and feel their visceral reaction, being able to express themselves this way, for me, was so powerful, and that was really the aha moment.
So I had a moment of anxiety that maybe I could have expressed better by going through this, because I thought, uh-oh, I'm going to be asked to do art. No, not
Right.
me. So, but then I relaxed as I realized, oh, I get to control each piece
That's
of
right.
this and figure out what it is that I want to say now, and I can't be wrong.
That's right, and in fact, you notice I never use the word photography or art. We explicitly don't ever talk about that with participants because it creates a barrier, the barrier you're just now mentioning, where people think I'm not artistic and I don't have any creative abilities. We say to people, this is something that everyone can do. You're just expressing what you're feeling inside of you. In the discussions about the images, it's never saying, oh, that is a beautiful image. That's not a language that we use. The language is, you've done a wonderful job of sharing what it is that you're feeling. Thank you for sharing that with us. And that's a very important distinction, to take the art barrier out of this.
So I get your ability for me as a potential patient or someone who could use this in any kind of therapy. But how do you make the business case to folks you have to talk to? Because it feels a little new agey.
Yeah.
You know what that means. Nobody wants to put money toward that.
So the business case is clearly improvement of outcomes, faster care, because now clinicians will be able to understand what people are experiencing more effectively and at a more rapid pace. More effective outcomes is clearly where this is going. We expect this will one day be covered by carriers, by insurance companies. Today, the business case is with institutions who are willing to make the leap, and we license this to organizations who are paying for it because they believe that their outcomes will improve even without the scientific evidence yet. We intentionally worked on design and innovation before we moved to research, and now with organizations like McLean Hospital and Gosnell on Cape Cod and others, we're performing that research. Once that's there, and the business case is out there for the improvement in outcomes, I'm convinced this becomes inevitable.
So last question. I can understand, particularly from your personal story about how this came to be meaningful to you. We certainly have heard from some patients, even from the first sandwich picture, about how that was meaningful to the people who could potentially experience hearing. I always want to know about the curmudgeons who are like, yeah, Steve, I'm not using this with my patients, and then saw how it worked. Give us a story about that, if you would.
I guess I will give an example from the VA hospital in Brockton, which is a wonderful organization. The clinicians there are extremely forward-thinking, but in this case, Callie, actually it was the participants who were the curmudgeons, It was a group of older gentlemen who said, I don't know computers. I don't do this kind of thing. That's kind of what I relish, is that challenge, because, and they didn't even know how to use an iPad. We literally had to walk around the room, show them how to hit the home button to clear the screen and get to the main menus. But what is so special is 15 minutes in, as their fingers are going across the screen and they're seeing these effects come up, and then they're sharing such deep personal stories and making comments like, I've been coming here 15 years and not been able to share this story of how when I was a child, my father used to lock me in a toy chest and I could just barely see the light coming through and I could barely breathe. And this image expresses what today I still feel and remember from that experience, and I can't believe I'm sharing that with all of you. And this is a gentleman who said, I don't really even know why I'm here at the beginning, that to me is what this is all about, and why it's so heartwarming. So that wasn't a curmudgeon clinician, it was a curmudgeon participant, but it's the same kind of thing that we see.
Thank you. Our thanks to Steve Koppel, EDI
Thank you.
Institute.